Hello and welcome to Silent Gaming. Long-time subscribers, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, hello, welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about underrated, underseen, underappreciated solo games, which I consider hidden gems. One of the reasons I started this channel was to champion some lesser-known games. There's a lot of really good YouTube channels out there talking about solitaire war games. But there's certain titles and publishers I just very rarely see mentioned, which I think is a massive shame. I think if you're a lover of games, if you're a lover of history, a student of history, there's a lot out there for you. I think there tends to be a kind of set a standard or a list of solo games which are very popular and for good reason, from big publishers on topics people are very interested in. But like I said, there's a wealth of stuff out there, and one of the reasons, like I said, I wanted to start this channel was to really kind of show off some of those games. So without further ado, I'll get into it. I've got 5 games to show you today. These are all solitaire only. I do enjoy playing 2-player games, two-handed, or switching hats as it were, but I know a lot of you out there just want the pure solo experience, which I can completely understand. So without further ado, I'll get into it. I'll talk about what the game is, what it's about, why I think it's underrated or underappreciated or just doesn't have that much publicity. I'll tell you why I really like it and what you can get from it. I'm not going to look through the boxes, but I'll post some pictures of the map on the counter so you can get a sense of what to expect. So first up is Profile in Courage, PT109. This is from High Flying Dice Games, who are a smaller publisher. Their games tend to have a kind of DIY feel to them, which is cool. It can be a bit of a pain because you have to kind of mount the counters yourself. I picked this one up secondhand, so I didn't have to do that. Paul Ruba, I always get that name a bit wrong. Apologies, Paul, if you're watching. Is the head of the company basically, and there's some other designers. So this was designed by Rod Bauer. And this game, if you're familiar with the Pacific, which I'm sure a lot of you are, PT-109, you might recognize this as being John F. Kennedy's torpedo boat. So this game centers on, I forget actually, I forget where. I think it's like the Solomon Islands, I want to say, in and around there. And it's a really simple but evocative game, and it kind of feels like a much lighter version of some of those big GMT story-driven games like The Hunters, The Hunted, Silent Victory, and also a game that Compass put out a few years ago, Devil Boats, and they've just released Schnell Boats as well. It's not quite as chart-based and dice-rolly or storytelling. It's a grid map, very few counters, very simple mechanics, but like a very evocative sense of time and place and mission as well. This is a game, I haven't actually played this one in a while, but I've had a lot of fun when I have played it, and it plays really quick as well. It can be a bit swingy and a bit luck-based, but it's a really interesting game, and I think it's quite easy to pick up. If you're based in America, you can order direct from High Flying Dice Games, and I think you can even pay extra for them to mount the counters for you. It's kind of card driven, you get missions assigned to you, there's nice bits of chrome, good storytelling aspects, but it's not the whole focus of the game. I think a lot of you would be interested in this because I know these types of games on these topics are very popular, and it's not very often that you get to play as someone like JFK. So that's a really interesting one. A game I don't think I've ever seen this brought up or mentioned anywhere really, which I think is a shame. I think High Flying Dice, like I said, their games tend to be a bit DIY, sometimes a bit underbaked, sorry, but that's the case. I know some people just don't have the patience or the time to kind of interpret poorly written rules. This one is actually quite well done, quite well written. There wasn't really much I was struggling with. But yeah, like I think the reason this one doesn't get mentioned is that there's bigger and more kind of meaty offerings around these kind of topics. They typically tend to be like submarine based, or you've got the grand like sweeping Pacific campaign stuff like Empire of the Sun. But if you're looking for a light, fun, unique and interesting game, I really recommend picking this one up. I got this from Noble Knight. I don't know if they have any in stock at the moment. I didn't pay a great deal for it. But yeah, this is a game I really enjoy, and like I said, I just very rarely see it mentioned anywhere. So this is one to consider. This PT-109 Profiling Courage. So next up, if you've seen my top 10 solo-only games video, you might recognize this one for being quite high up in my list. This is Foreign Legion Paratrooper from Decision Games. This was published in their Modern War magazine. I believe this is one of the later releases. Unfortunately, Modern War magazine has called it a day, which I'm completely devastated by, to be honest with you, because some of my favourite solitaire games, some of my favourite war games in general have been published in that magazine. This is designed by Joseph Miranda, who I think is a really interesting and like an unsung hero of wargaming, and especially solitaire gaming. This game is really interesting, and it's really well suited to campaign play because, again, I'll throw the map up on the screen. You get these small boxes which are kind of generic. You know, there's no specific countries mentioned, but you've got some kind of specific terrains which you'd expect to see in these parts of the world. Typically, you're operating off the Horn of Africa, deep in the Congo, like Mali, that kind of thing. Again, it's not explicitly named, these countries, but you have these regions you go to, and then you'll have randomly generated missions. They could be in a desert, a jungle, a big urban environment, mountainous, mining town. I think there's about 8 in total, and they're small hex grid maps. Not a great deal of maneuvering to be done on them, but what maneuvering is to be done is very important. And this game is really interesting because it has a very noticeable and tangible kind of domino effect in terms of how you set up. There's a big, how you set up and where your missions are based. How well you do on one mission can dictate the next mission. You're slowly building up your order of battle. It's completely up to you, which I think is amazing. You know, you've got choice of paratroopers, you know, special forces, technicals, helicopters, snipers, anti-tank, guided rockets, things like that. Just lots of interesting stuff to play around with, especially if you're into modern war settings. I think this might be a bit easier for some people to stomach because it's hypothetical. It is kind of based on French doctrine, particularly in their involvement in Central Africa, in like Mali and Chad and places like that. Again, it's you don't see many hex and counter only war games, and there is some area movement stuff in here, but that's more your basing zones. So I think, you know, that straight away that piqued my interest. A common strand in many of Joseph Miranda's games is complete freedom of order of battle. You might get some starting units assigned to you, but ultimately it's up to you, and I always find there's a very interesting economy with that, kind of sacrificing momentum or even victory points to get the troops you want. So you could go like all guns blazing with a lot of kind of cheaper units and kind of swarm in, or you could focus on smaller teams. And there's what I really like about this as well is I find in a lot of games you get to the objective and that's it, but in this you actually have to extract, and you can kind of leave pieces set up in those areas in case you have to go back later, basically. So it's a really interesting, tangible knock-on effect from mission to mission. You can play these in kind of shorter individual scenarios. They're not specific scenarios, but you could just go as long as you want. But I think this game really shines in like a campaign setting, and it would be very easy to kind of take a couple of pictures and save game, as it were. There's lots of charts and tables. It's quite a common thing for decision games on the map. I really like it. It saves me faffing around and flipping through the rulebook. I think this game doesn't get enough love. I don't think enough Modern War magazine games get love, really. I know Decision Games has got a bit of a reputation for maybe underbaked or underdeveloped games being published, but I think when you're in that magazine space, that's to be expected. The rules for this one are actually quite well done. You might need to do some interpreting, but if you're used to Joseph Miranda's games, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to pick up. Another thing, a reason I think this is kind of underappreciated or unknown is that there's a smaller modern war theme is a kind of smaller subset within wargaming. I find that there are people who are interested in it, and when they are interested in it, they tend to be very interested in it. But I've touched on this in my other videos. I'm not saying this is an issue. I completely understand it, but most people tend to prefer historical gaming, like World War II, World War One, Civil War, etc. But this is a really interesting exercise in kind of what it says, rapid response forces, you know, like responding to crisis. There's a really interesting crisis meter. So the longer your missions go on, the more chance of negative world opinion, of disaster happening, of a breakdown happening, and you not being able to stop the threat in time. So there's a really interesting multi-layered game where you've got the strategic side of you, setting up your units, setting up forward operating bases in order to launch missions in various zones around the world, various hotspots, with kind of marring with public opinion, into service, kind of not rivalry as such, but how well coordinated your units can be, and also just kind of there's not many games I've encountered which let you play as the modern French army. There's a couple, there's a bunch of World War II stuff. Next War, which I'm a big fan of, has some French units, but not a great deal. So yeah, this French Foreign Legion paratrooper, rapid response force, very catchy name. Criminally underrated game. I think this is probably the highest rated on Board Game Geek of the games I'm going to talk about, and for good reason. And I think regardless of your tastes in terms of historical focus, if you want a really interesting and engaging game where you get to play around with a lot of interesting units, you can amphibious assault, you can power drop, you can move by helicopter, you can convoy. Like, this is a really, really good game to pick up, and I find a lot of these are very readily available. I'm in the UK, as you can probably tell. I tend to get most, if not all, of my games from Second Chance Games. They've got plenty of Modern War stuff in stock, and last time I checked, this was in stock as well. So yeah, that's a really, really awesome and unique game. And the other great thing about magazine games, in a way, I kind of prefer them to box games, because you get those accompanying articles with kind of background, designer's intent, which can go a longer way than just having a paragraph of design notes at the end, basically. So yeah, really, really interesting. That's Foreign Legion paratrooper. Okay, next up, from one of my favorite publishers, and from a very famous designer as well. Again, this was brought up in my top 10 solo only list, one of my older videos. You can check that out. I didn't talk a great deal about it. I touched on it briefly, but yeah, this is Dunkirk, a spoiled victory, or a spoiled victory Dunkirk, rather, 1940. I mean, if you're a student of history, you should know this name carries a lot of weight with it, because this was arguably one of the, if not, maybe not the most important, but one of the most important events of World War II. Had this have gone poorly, it would have been a very, very different story. So this is designed by Herman Luttmann, who, like I said, that's a big name. He's got some amazing games. Famous designer, and rightly so. He's a very, very thoughtful designer. This one I'm kind of surprised actually doesn't have more of a following. Again, I don't really see it mentioned very often. It's a bit of an older game, but this is White Dot Games. They've earned a very good reputation for really well-designed solitaire-only games. They do two-player games as well, but like names like Arben Madison, all of his games are really well-loved. But yeah, I just don't see this one brought up very often. What's really interesting to me about this game, which I don't see in a lot of war games, is that this is, well, yes, it is a war game and it's war-themed, Dunkirk, obviously. It has some stuff in common, I guess, with States of Siege, kind of. But this game really is about coordination, evacuation, timing and infrastructure, which is just like something you don't see all that often. Like most games, yeah, they have some kind of emphasis on supply or logistics. It might be as basic as tracing a line of communication, or as in-depth as something like Nemesis Burma, which I'm currently playing, or Next War, where you have to create these really kind of intricate lines of supply and logistics. Anyway, sorry, I'm waffling, I'm not talking about those games. In this game, you have your units, you've got your French, Belgium, and your British units being pushed by the Germans from every angle, essentially, and you've got a limited amount of time, limited amount of people. The thing I love so much about this game is you're actually trying to evacuate your troops. You're not trying to take new ground, you're not trying to push back the Germans, you're trying to get out. So what's really interesting there is you're actually turning your combat units into evacuee units. So you've got to make some really tough decisions on who to evacuate and when, you know, and then you've got to choose which route you want to take. There's some that take longer, there's some that are shorter but run the risk of German interdiction. Your infrastructure can break down if you lose the main jetties. It's going to be a lot harder for you to evacuate units faster. You've got some really interesting kind of chromie options. You can build the mall, you can build additional jetties, you can flood the marshlands to slow the Germans down. And this has a lot of replayability, because whilst your objective is always the same, the Germans are card activated, and there's so many variations on who moves and when, how they move, can they move. It's very hard for you to attack them successfully, so you've got to really be confident that you can get some hits and push them back. You can't completely eliminate them, but you can bruise them, which I think is a really interesting way to kind of synthesize that history of there's basically no way, you could argue this, I guess, there's basically no way that the British could have counterattacked in that instance. This was all about getting out, getting back to the UK, getting your shit together, as it were, and going back. So whilst it does take you can't play around with history as much in terms of non-historical outcomes, the player agency in this is amazing, because you just, it's completely up to you who goes and when, which route you take, when are you going to build the infrastructure, when are you going to counterattack, are you going to counterattack? And you could, like I said, you've got some really strong units, but you need to get them out, you know, and I genuinely feel bad if I get people stuck, you know. So yeah, it's a really interesting game. I've talked about why I think some of these games are kind of underrated or underknown. Honestly, with this one, I'm not really sure, because this kind of falls into a category I would have thought people would be more interested in. That's famous World War II event, very well-known, very respected designer, and a very well-known, at this stage anyway, publishing company, White Dog Games. I don't know exactly when this came out. I want to say maybe like 2014. I really like the cover art on this one too, and the map itself is quite nice as well. I know Legion Wargames and Herman Luttman are working on like a really cool looking redo of this, which is a bit more in depth, bigger scale. The map's a bit different. I think might be 2-player as well, but we'll have solo engine too. I'm really excited about that. I think it's called Miracle at Dunkirk with the French spelling. I'm not going to do the pronunciation, just in case Homo Ludens is watching. But yeah, Dunkirk, Sport Victory, really worth checking out. Again, very available, I think. That's another thing, I'm trying to show you games which you can pick up quite easily. Yeah, really highly recommend this one if you're looking for something a bit different, and with an emphasis more on damage control than full on, just going for a full on attack, you know. So yeah, Sport Victory, Dunkirk. I'll save that one till last actually. This one, I was struggling with this one because I think it is quite a seen game, it's quite a known game. I covered it on my channel it's one of my most successful videos. I mentioned in that video, Zilla Blitz has covered it on his channel. I know Players Aid have done like an unboxing, and Legion Wargames have got a very good reputation at this stage, but again, I just don't really see many people playing it or posting about it or talking about it, which is, again, like, I think a massive shame. So that's Hill of Doves, the first Anglo-Boer War, 1880 to 1881. So I've got a full review on my channel of this. It's quite an in-depth video. I tend to waffle, which I'm sorry about. But yeah, Hill of Doves. So I touched on this in my other video. I think if people are familiar with the Boer War, they're more familiar with the Second Boer War. Maybe because it was a slightly more favourable outcome for the British. Still a very embarrassing campaign, marred by just complete incompetence. And as was this. And I love, in my solo games especially, I love tricky situations where the odds are against you and they model in that history of the kind of incompetency and really the themes and the mechanics all work together really nicely. I also love logistics in my games, and this game has all of this in spades. It's a really interesting triple layer thing going on. You've got strategic, operational, and tactical, 3 levels of the campaign which you're looking at. And the strategic level, you're bringing in your reinforcements and you're trying to hold off the kind of political maneuvering and do what you can to stop some of the territories and towns being besieged. On the operational map, you're bringing in your supply in this really interesting way. Like a lot of games, like I said, it will just be, here's your line of communication, but in this one you actually physically have to bring in your ammunition, your medicine, your food, and it is used on the tactical map. Then you can't attack without ammunition, you know, obviously. So a lot of games, obviously, they don't have that level of detail with their supply. This is an amazing game. Like it's in history, this was, you know, in theory, this should have been a cakewalk for the British. You know, this is a professional army. They had the numbers, they had the equipment, but the Boers, who are essentially just farmers. Again, I talk more about this in my other video. They know the terrain. They're far more motivated. And really, back home, no one really cared. This was basically the result of a hapless general wanting to prove himself, and it just was a disaster for the British, basically. So I think it's really interesting to play around with that, and the mechanics of this game are really interesting in the way that, yeah, you have the numbers. In theory, you have the quality, but you've got to hold everything you take. The more losses you take in battle, the more likely you are to get ambushed, the more likely your supply is to get ambushed, the more likely the political jostling is to go in the favour of the Boers. It's just amazing. It's such a rich, interesting experience. It can be, it's quite a long game, it's very procedural. Could be seen as a little dry, depending on what you're into. For me, like, I'm very much kind of theatre of the mind person, and this game, everything that happens in this game is so tangible to me. And, you know, I'm not, I don't hate Britain, I'm not particularly patriotic. I hate the Britain of this era, and it's fun playing around with something that kind of goes against your moral code, and even funner to kind of think about the blithering generals on the ground, just, you know, in this horrible, ridiculous situation, basically. So yeah, really awesome game. Great graphic design, great theme, amazing mechanics, great designer, great publisher. But I think one of the reasons this game is underrated or underknown or whatever you want to call it, I think is the rulebook is quite a slog. It's very weirdly written. Everything is there, but there's no like index. If you want to find something, it can be very frustrating. But luckily there's cards which have most of the rules on them, and a lot of it is just really actually quite straightforward, but deceptively so. And there's just quite a lot of moving parts, and I just think, like I said, not many people have the interest in this campaign. But if you like solitaire games, and I assume you like history, like, please just give this one a chance. Like, I've got a video with some gameplay. I hope it does a good job. Zilla Blitz has got a really good learning video. Glenn Saunders made a really good player aid on Board Game Geek. Like, there's enough support now, I think, that you could pick this up and be able to play it pretty easily. I think this one's still quite available. It does tend to be a bit more expensive, but you know, you actually get really good quality components in a really nice box. And just, there's nothing quite like it on the market, and I'm really excited to see what Godfrey Bailey comes out with next, because this game is so thoughtful, so interesting, and has just the right amount of depth and detail without being a slog. So yeah, that's Hill of Doves, First World War, 1880 to 1881, just awesome game. So last but not least, I saved probably what I think is maybe not the most underrated solitaire wargame of all time, but it's definitely close. And I just want to give a kind of, not a warning as such, but this is a game on a very controversial topic, a game on a topic which a lot of people are scared to touch, especially designers, I think. But a topic that I think is so important to our modern history and so relevant to now, and understanding what happened in the last 20 years, understanding what could have been done, why, the impact of the country it took place in, and the impact of back home. And then basically, this game is Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, 2001 to 2002. So this is the initial push into Afghanistan. Again, super controversial topic. I have a great deal of interest in the global war on terror, and especially Afghanistan. I think it's incredibly, there's so much misunderstanding around why the West was there, what was happening on the ground, how the population was affected. So much stuff to unpack. And again, it's just something which I feel is not being buried, like everyone knows about it, but it's just something that's not talked about very often, especially in the wargaming space. And I think it's harder for me to understand as a British person. Obviously, Britain was there, you know, we took losses, there was a tangible effect on the home front. I was growing up in this time, you know, I'm 26 now. This was every day on the news for me. I very vividly remember 9/11. You know, I think even as a 4-year-old, everyone in my school knew everything had just changed, basically. Sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, this is, I think that's what I was trying to say. For Americans, which I know a lot of viewers of this channel are, a lot of wargamers are, this is probably something which is a bit more close to home because of the sheer number of troops America had involved in the war, and you know, more troops is going to equal more casualties, more trauma, more unrest on the home front, more outrage at what is going on, and equally more of a polarized media opinion as well. So it's easy for me to recommend this because I have a massive interest in the Afghanistan war. But I completely understand why people wouldn't want to play games about Afghanistan, despite me thinking it's an incredibly important and probably one of the most landmark events of definitely the history in the last 100 years, maybe human history in general. And I think the more you look into this conflict, the more you unpack, the more you read, the more your understanding grows, the more you start to realize just how crazy, horrific, poorly planned and poorly executed it all was. Maybe not all of it, there was some success. I want to talk about this more in another video. I forgot, we're talking about good solo games here. So with all that heavy stuff out the way, I want to talk about Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan 2001, 2002. This is another Joseph Miranda game, another Modern War magazine game, very available and pretty good, pretty cheap as well. This is an area movement game. You know, you've got pretty much the whole of Afghanistan, all the major regions, all the major cities, Kandahar, Kabul, Herat. You've got some of the major strong points, Tora Bora, some really important or seemingly important or well-known regions, Helmand, etc. As well as some of the border regions modeled in. This covers the beginning stages of Operation Enduring Freedom, and it gives you a lot of flexibility as to how you want to do it. Historically, I forget the designation. There was a Green Beret ODA team that went in. They were the first on the ground. Probably some more like CIA paramilitary operations going on as well. And they linked up with what would become, or what was the Northern Alliance, headed by General Dostum, or Dotsum, I always forget how it's linked. Anyway, very famous, immortalized in a pretty terrible film, unfortunately, called 12 Strong. And yeah, this game gives you so many avenues on how to do this, how to do it right, per se, how to do it wrong, and has this really interesting economy tied in where your victory points are your resource points. And the more force you have on the ground, the more resource points you have to pay to upkeep those forces, and the more fragile they become if you can't afford it, and then before you know it, if your victory points are gone, you've lost the game. This gives you a really awesome, again, similar to Foreign Legion Paratrooper, you can set your order of battle, and there's some really interesting units to play with. So basically what you're doing is this doesn't focus so much on counterinsurgency in the sense of getting the population on your side. This is the initial drive into Afghanistan, clearing it of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, trying to set up a solid foundation to then start your Hearts of Mine campaign. So you have all your targets laid out face down. There's some key players, al-Zarqawi, Bin Laden, they're all around, and basically you have a huge number of assets on hand to help you tackle this. So you've got a large number of special forces, irregular troops. So you've got Green Berets, Task Force, K-Bar, which is like SAS, Delta, Australians, Canadian JTF, stuff like that, German KSK, all the ones you can think of, they're all modeled in, and they can operate behind enemy lines. They don't need that kind of sustainment, which I think is really cool, quite true to history. And then you've got your more conventional ground forces, your striker battalions, your armoured battalions, your infantry divisions, your Marines, NATO QRFs, even some of the minor nations are in here, you know, France, etc. Can't think of them right now off the top of my head, Canada. And then you have a lot of kind of, you know, intelligence assets, drone strikes, air strikes, and it's tied into this really neat jihad index where, depending on what's happening on the board, how successful you've been, that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda will start responding to you and popping up when you don't want them to, and they're nestled in these mountain fortresses, and you've got to find the best way to get in there, do it as quick and as clean as possible. And what I love about this game is you have the Northern Alliance modeled in. So there's just so many ways you could play it. You could go in completely conventional ground forces, stronger units, who will have more, the way combat works is you roll a number of dice based on the combat factor, and 5s and 6s it hits basically. So, you know, your bigger conventional units will be able to roll more, but there's also overkill. So if you get too many excess hits, you're gonna start losing points. The jihad index is gonna ride. it's going to be harder for you in the long run. So yeah, you can go in conventionally. This is going to cost you a lot of victory points in upkeeping your military, your army on the ground. They're also more expensive and harder to re-implement, to reinstate if they do get knocked out. You could do a mixture of unconventional with your special forces units and conventional, have smaller kind of QRFs to mop up any resistance. You could even do it would be very difficult, completely with drone strikes, airstrikes, and intelligence. But my favorite way to play, and I just don't see this enough in games, is you can send your special forces in and they can recruit Northern Alliance pro-coalition militia, and they can do the fighting for you, basically, which is kind of the ideal outcome, I guess. And you've got some really key players on their side involved as well, and you can spend time getting everyone together to enact Lawyer Jirga, which is like a Afghani kind of, I don't want to say ritual, but I don't know what the kind of correct word would be, a political move. You know, you've got like really interesting helicopter movement. You're very free to do it as you want, basically. And it's a really steep learning curve. The first couple of times I played this, I literally failed within like 2 turns. There's so much replayability here because you just have such a wide array of units at your disposal. And just so many avenues you can take to achieve your victory. The rulebook is bad. I persevered with it because I'm just so interested in the subject matter. But once you get to grips with it, it plays quite quick. I think you can get a game done within about 3 hours. It's a really nicely designed map. Just very evocative, very well-designed game where, again, like Hill of Doves, the history, the themes and the mechanics all tie into each other in a way that is just is seldom seen. You know, you can have a great game, but it won't necessarily reflect the historical setting, or you can have a game which just focuses too much on the history when it's no fun to play. And you know, it's weird to put the words Afghanistan and fun together, but like I can't emphasize enough just how unique and interesting this game is, and again, just I just feel like as history lovers, as gamers, we should really spend more time exploring controversial topics and kind of trying to get more of an understanding of what happened, how it could have been done differently, and who are the key players involved. And this game just has that in spades. Again, you know, I've touched on why I think this is underplayed. It's just really controversial and a topic which is maybe a bit too close to home for a lot of people. So I'm kind of in two minds. You know, like I love this game. I'd recommend this game to certain people. I know I just said you should play it, but I'm not going to think less of you if you don't, especially if you have a tie to this. And it is a tragic situation. But yeah, as Operation Enduring Freedom, Modern War magazine, really great article comes with that as well, and goes into more of the other lesser known parts of Operation Enduring Freedom, like the involvement in Africa and the Philippines, which I'd love to see in a game. But yeah, amazing game. I'm so sad that Modern War magazine doesn't exist anymore. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out, honourable mention to this. This is apologies. This is Line of Khartoum, Gordon's Last Stand. This is from White Dog Games. This is a solitaire take on the States of Siege system, but it's very unique in the sense, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time talking about this, in the sense you can actually launch these raids and these raiding parties and things like that, and it gives you a lot more flexibility than your average States of Siege game. So yeah, it's just a quick honourable mention. I was struggling with this one because there is an optimal way to play, I think, and once you kind of figure it out, there's not much replayability there. But yeah, interesting game, really nice graphic design, especially on the cards, and again, like a kind of under-known or under-talked about part of history. So yeah, so that's it. There's 5 games, 5 hidden gems, which I think, if any of this has piqued your interest, I really recommend going out and trying to find a copy. Most of these are quite cheap, apart from Hill of Doves. As far as I can tell, apart from the Modern War stuff, they're all still in print. The Modern War stuff, though, it's very easy to source. I hope this doesn't bump the price up. Maybe I shouldn't think so highly of my opinion, but you know, there tends to be price spikes sometimes with certain games. But yeah, really worth checking out. worth looking into. Plenty of stuff on Board Game Geek about a lot of these. Hill of Doves, you can watch my full review if you are so inclined. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something from this. If you end up playing any of these games, let me know what you think. Or if you have played them as well, let me know what you think. Thanks for the support so far. Things are going well. I'm going to try and upload more regularly. I know I say that every time, but life gets in the way. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much for watching.